Good morning, everyone, and thanks for that introduction, Tom. I was telling my seatmates that I was here last year, and the prizes at this conference are top-notch, and so I hope that the speakers are also eligible for these prizes, Tom. I'll make sure to remember the things, at least, that I'm going to say during this panel. And please, raise your hand. Feel free to ask questions, because these things are most useful when we get some interaction with the audience and I get to respond to the questions that are top of mind for you. But it's interesting because we just heard a lot about AI, and now I'm going to take you down memory lane to talk about phishing attacks and the evolution of phishing attacks over time. First, before we get started, let's talk about why we care about phishing attacks. In 2021, the Federal Trade Commission said that the most prevalent scam that defrauded a lot of consumers was internet-based. In 2022, the FTC reported that consumers lost over $330 million in tech scams. By 2023, the FTC has reported that consumers lost $618 million on impersonation scams. That's over $200 million more than the prior year. And that does not include the over $2.7 billion that people lost on imposter scams and the $1.4 billion that they lost on social media scams. In 2023, the Better Business Bureau reported that phishing scams increased by over 100% from the year prior, and AI is contributing to the prevalence of these types of attacks and the success of these types of attacks. Let's put that in context. In June, as of June of 2024, phishing is the most common form of cybercrime. And 3.4 billion spam emails are sent every single day around the world. Google alone blocks 100 million spam emails daily. And over 48% of emails sent in 2022 was spam. And you probably are not surprised by that because of the amount of spam that you get. I know I get a lot of those. And as per the IBM data breach report, which is issued annually, the average cost of a data breach is $4 million. If you have a cyber incident preparedness plan, that reduces a little bit to about $3 million. And that's just in the United States. It's not counting, that's around the world. If you're looking just at the United States data, that number is going to increase exponentially. So how many of you have received this email? I'm a prince from another country. I have inherited a lot of money. I need your help. Please help me. How many of you have received it? Don't be shy. It's okay. Okay, I have received them as well. I'm not going to ask you how many of you have fallen for it, because obviously none of you IT professionals have fallen for the scam at all. So I want to go back a little bit in history. In the 1800s, the U.S. Postal Service started buying a lot of different methods of transportation to distribute mail. In the early 1800s, people didn't send individual mail. It was too expensive. By the second half of the 1800s, people could receive individual mail because the U.S. Postal Service reduced the cost of sending mail. But also, on top of that, there was an infrastructure that allowed for the delivery of mail. Again, to put it in perspective, by the second half of the 1800s, there was an increase by 16 times, and there was an increase in the volume of mail sent to individuals 16 times larger than the population size of the United States. That's how many mail people were sending. You might be asking yourself, why is this woman talking about mail and the history of mail in the United States? Because phishing and the underlying concepts of phishing really started in the 1800s. In the 1800s, there was what's called a Spanish prisoner scam. It wasn't actually proliferated by any foreign nationals. It was actually a US-based scam. And a person would say, look, I'm in a Spanish prison. I have a daughter that I need to care for. Can you please help me out? I have a stash of gold and jewels that I will give you if you help me with my daughter. And by the way, can you just send me a couple of bucks to help out with her expenses? No big deal. You're going to get so many riches and so much treasure from this that it's going to be worth your while. And of course, people responded. Again, this was in the 1800s, and people responded. Fast forward, by the 1960s, there was a study that was performed, and women were asked if they would allow 5 to 6 people to come into their homes and just catalog what brands of soap and other products they use. And the women said yes. A lot of the women said yes. What the researchers found is that it's easier to get people to say yes to bigger asks because it's a lot of work and a lot of time to devote to allowing people to catalog products in your home. And what they found was if you reached out to these people in advance and asked them for something that is not as big, if you asked them, for example, can you just tell me what your favorite brand of soap is? And they responded, if you reach back out to them again and ask them for something bigger, they were more likely to say yes. So again, these underlying principles that still are used today by these attackers have been around society for a very long time and are still being used very successfully. And the psychology around it has also been remained consistent. So let's talk a little bit about what phishing is. I've been using that term a lot. I assume all, if not most of you know what it is, but because I'm also a law professor at Fordham Law, and I'm a lawyer, I never like to assume what people know and don't know, especially for those of you who might be coming into the space relatively new. So what's phishing? It's a form of social engineering, basically using your daily activities, your connections, your friends, and your publicly available information in order to trick you by using emails or text messages and the like into revealing personal or confidential information. Most of the time, the way we will see this come up is on text message or emails where a communication looks like it's from a legitimate source, likely a source that you expect to communicate with, and then it asks you to take some kind of action. And the action is going to be urgent, and it's going to ask you to either provide your personal information or some other confidential information. And it's urgent because, again, when we're talking about human psychology, people are more likely to fall for a scam if they don't have time to think about it. And if the email is urgent or the text is urgent, you're going to think, I'm going to get fired or something really bad is going to happen if I don't act right away. So I'm going to save my company by acting right away on my CEO's directive, and therefore I'm going to take this action that this fraudulent communication is asking me to do. What are the goals of phishing attacks? It can vary, and it's actually evolved over time. Initially, phishing attacks were all about stealing personal information, stealing your username, your email, your password, in order to log in as you on legitimate websites and steal your identity or steal your personal information. It's now evolved. In fact, a few years ago, the fighter jets, the U.S. Military F-35 fighter jets, the plans for that were stolen. It was stolen using a phishing attack. So confidential information, intellectual property has also been the target of these types of attacks. And in fact, there are also individuals or bad actors now that also just want to wreak havoc. There are a lot of state actors that want to sow discord and confusion or paralyze an organization. Frequently, phishing attacks can be used as a vector for ransomware attacks. And ransomware, of course, is the deployment of a virus or malware in order to encrypt your data or your network so that you can't conduct your day-to-day business operations. And then they demand that you pay a ransom in order to get either the decryption key and or to prevent the disclosure publicly of the information that the bad actors have been able to exfiltrate from your data system. Phishing is actually derived from phreaking, which is a short for phone phreak. It's the fraudulent manipulation of telephone signaling so that you can make free phone calls. When I was young, I used to think, I don't understand it. Why? I can probably come up with a device that can mimic the sounds that each button makes, and therefore, make some phone calls or figure out what numbers people are dialing in. And that's exactly what happened. But in the early 1980s, the phone companies, bless you, the phone companies wisened up to that and were able to stop those types of attacks. How many of you are familiar with this image? All right, that makes me feel better because I was not aware of it either until I started getting into the space. So this is the first known phishing attack. And it was called AOL. How many of you were AOL customers? Okay, that makes me feel so much better. So for those of you who didn't raise your hands, AOL was the first, it was called America Online. It was the first service provider for internet services. And this was back in the day when everyone had really huge desktops that took up your entire desk, and in order to connect to the internet, you had to use your telephone modem. So you can't make a phone call. And you had a lot of yelling at your parents to get off, for you to get off the phone, or for you to get off the internet so that they can make phone calls. And it was a very slow connection. But the way that you were able to get the software to get on the internet is by these compact discs. And they would mail millions of these compact discs, and you would put them in your computer, you would upload the software, and then that would allow you to get onto the internet. Well, there was a 17-year-old in Pennsylvania that said, you know what, AOL, first of all, I really don't like these CDs that you keep polluting the environment with. And also, by the way, AOL, I need you to stop allowing access to children. This is a 17-year-old, okay? He claims that he didn't want AOL to provide access to certain websites that would be harmful to children. And AOL refused to take them down. So he said, you know what? That's fine, that's okay. I'll just create a virus to stop you, in order for me to accomplish my goal, if you won't do it to help me out. And really, I should have shown you the video of nothing but a G thing, because the way it worked, and it was a phishing attack, and it was in the early 90s, it was in 1994, and the way it would work is, it was essentially an automated phishing attack. There was a packet, and you would open it, and it would direct you to a website, and it was an automated fake account generator, and it would steal your credit card information because it would ask you for that, and then also it could do a few different things in an automated way, including that it would automatically send emails to your contacts, and also that it could log you out of your system. It could kick you out of chat rooms also if it's deployed. And then it was also mimicking the AOL founder, Steve Case, in chat rooms. And so this 17-year-old's virus was pretending to be this person. AOL, this was so prevalent that AOL actually had to issue a new version and send out more CDs of their software in order to stop the attack, because they couldn't figure out how to do it. And also, the Chronic was the Chronic with a D, like the Bronx was the name of the 17-year-old. That was his online nickname. All right, so let's move on to later in history and the 2000s. Before we talk about the Nordea Bank loss, how many of you remember the I Love You attack? Okay, so in the early 2000s, there was a 24-year-old from the Philippines, and it pains me to say this because I'm torn whether I should be proud of him or ashamed of him, because I also am originally from the Philippines. There was a 24-year-old who developed the I Love You phishing attack. Basically, he submitted a paper to his college, and he said, you know, what would be really good is free internet access for all. So why don't we create a program that just steals online passwords from users and give them away to the people so that they can access internet? Because back then you had to pay, right, to access the internet. And the university said, no, that's we're not going to do that. That's not appropriate. It's not ethical. But at the time, there were no laws against it. So it was actually not a crime at the time to do what he did. So he said, you know what, university, that's okay. I don't need you to bless my project. And he developed this phishing attack. And basically, you would get an email, and it would say something like, please see my I love you letter in the attached. And of course, everyone opened the email attachment that was called I love you, and it deployed it deployed malware on the computer once that was done. You didn't need to actually even do anything. Back then, most of the phishing attacks really involved attachments, and once you open them, they would deploy the malware. And just to give you a sense of how successful this was, it's still to date one of the most successful phishing attacks. Tells you how much people want to hear that they're loved, actually. Again, the human psychology behind all of this is very fascinating to me. So in 5 hours, this attack spread across Asia, Europe, and North America. That's 5 hours. And it's in the early 2000s. So just again, to provide context, only 28% of users in Hong Kong had email accounts and were using emails. Only 15% of users in France were using email. Only 27% of the UK population was using email and 43% in the US. So despite these relatively low levels of email usage, this attack still managed to get around the world and managed to cause $10 billion worth of damages. Now the Nordea Bank attack seems to pale in comparison to that. Maybe I should have started with this bank attack. At the time, this was in 2007, this is a phishing attack that was targeted at bank users, and at the time this was called the biggest ever online bank heist by McAfee. It basically, there was a phishing email and people were asked to enter their emails and passwords, and that resulted in the transfer of $1.14 million worth of funds. All right, here are some more famous and notable phishing attacks during the 2000s. And the reason I want to go over this is because we learn a few different lessons from each of these, especially about the evolution of these types of attacks. So, for example, the first one is Operation Fish Fry. It's still to this day one of the largest ever cyber crimes that has been prosecuted by the United States. Over 100 people, or about 100 people, were arrested in the US and Egypt and actually prosecuted for phishing attacks. That's very rare. More often than not, and as a lawyer, we assist our clients in managing incidents where they're victims of a crime. We actually have a case now that's pending in the Western District of New York where the attacker was in the Ukraine. And it was a phishing attack and resulted in the loss of about $12 million worth of cryptocurrency. We worked closely with the DOJ and the FBI to investigate and ultimately extract the individual. They had to go on planes, trains, and automobiles and boats, apparently, in order to get the person here, but now they're prosecuting him. So it's very rare that the criminals are prosecuted for this, because typically they're in places in the world where the U.S. does not have an extradition treaty, or we don't have a good diplomatic relationship with them, and so they're very comfortable in proliferating these attacks from those jurisdictions. So Operation Fish Fry, still one of the largest prosecutions. RSA is another big one. This was in 2011. Again, this was another phishing attack. They had an attachment that was called recruitment plan. I don't know why employees would click on a link that's called recruitment plan if you're not in HR, but they did. And the lesson there, and what was interesting there, was RSA was a big cybersecurity giant. It served thousands of companies, including banks, government entities, and various other heavily regulated companies. And so people were so surprised, and it made such headlines, because if an organization as large as and as sophisticated as this organization can suffer this type of attack, then what hope do other organizations have? But I don't think people should despair. I think the lesson there really was you can't be complacent. You can't just rely on your technical measures in order to protect against these types of attacks. Really, this is all about human psychology and training of individuals. And that's why I emphasize a lot the human psychology behind phishing attacks, because I think it's very important for us to understand that so that we can train our personnel as effectively as possible. The Dyer attack was from 2014. That was another online banking attack. I'm not going to dwell on that, but that one was another malicious file that was executed. It was titled Unpaid Invoice. And so that shows you, right, in the early 2000s and even in the mid 2000s, the attacks were not as sophisticated as the attacks we see now. They're not personalized to the individual. They're more general. They're kind of just designed to get as many eyeballs to pay attention to them as possible and inspire as many people to act on the attachment as possible. The Sony Pictures leak was an interesting one. Again, that's another attack where users were asked to go to a website and enter their password and username, and that resulted in the release of unreleased films, contracts, private emails, employee data, and it cost $15 million in damages. That was the estimate right at the time that it occurred. The damages are likely larger than that, given the release of previously unreleased movies. And interestingly, the reason, and again, talking about the human psychology, not just of the victims, but also of the perpetrators, what precipitated this is the movie The Interview. Does anybody remember that movie? Has anyone seen it? Excellent. So it's a Seth Rogen movie. This might be a good question, Tom, just putting that out there. It's a Seth Rogen movie, and the premise is that there was going to be an assassination attempt on the North Korean leader in the guise of an interview. They were going to invite him to an interview, and then the assassination. It was a comedy, apparently. I did not watch it. And so there were North Korean actors, believed to be North Korean actors, who contacted Sony and said, Sony, don't release this movie. This is disrespectful. This is really unacceptable. And Sony said, nope, because first of all, we're going to lose $75 million, which is what they had spent to make the movie. And also, we want to build this relationship with Seth Rogen. So we're not, no thank you, North Korea. We're not going to do what you're asking us to do. And sure enough, the next thing you know, they're the victims of this attack. And again, Sony Pictures, very sophisticated party, very with a lot of bells and whistles to protect their data. And even they were subject to this attack. Upshur Smith was a pharmaceutical company, and there was a loss that resulted in $50 million. This attack was a result of whaling. How many of you have heard of that term, whaling? Oh, excellent, great, okay. So for those who didn't raise their hands, whaling is an attack that targets CEOs and other high-level executives. By that I mean that the phishing attacks pretend to be communications from these high-level executives because these communications are intended to scare the employees into taking action because you don't want to make your CEO mad. So in Upshur Smith, there were emails that asked for the transfer of various funds that resulted in a total of $50 million in losses, $50 million of fraudulent transfers. And the CFO was the recipient of these communications and was the one who authorized these transfers. What's notable about this, because I'm a lawyer to talk about some cases, what's notable about this is that the CEO and the CFO were actually sued by the company because the company said, look, we would not have suffered this loss had you taken reasonable precautionary measures in order to protect our funds. And what's interesting about that is there was also a case, it's called Schechter out of Virginia, where an employee was individually sued by other co-employees in a data breach where this defendant employee clicked on a phishing attempt and actually sent over, actually not clicked the phishing attempt, he received an email from the CEO, purportedly from the CEO, asking for all the employees' files because he needed to do some verification. And the employee said, okay, CEO, here are all the employees' files, including their social security numbers and other personal information. And of course, that is a data breach, and the employees sued the company, but also sued the individual. And what's notable is the court refused to dismiss the case against this individual because the court said, look, it was not reasonable. The actions that you took were not reasonable. So the other trend that we're seeing is that there is an increased attention to these types of incidents, and you're not insulated just because you're an employee for a company, especially if you are individually responsible for certain losses or data breaches. So something to think about. We're seeing that also for, how many CISOs are in the room? Okay, excellent. So I'm going to mention this to you because it's my role to scare you all because I'm the lawyer and that's why they bring me here. But Uber, actually, and Drizzly were sued recently because of a data breach. And there were government investigations related to those data breaches. And what's notable is that the CISOs in those cases, one was prosecuted criminally, the Uber CISO, and the DOJ basically said, look, we want to send a message to other CISOs and other C-suite level executives that you're going to be prosecuted for these types of, because you're responsible. And also he failed to report, and he's accused of hiding that there was a second data incident from the government. And so that was one of the issues. And then for Drizzly, the FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission, basically put out an order requiring that C-suite executive to employ certain minimum security standards no matter what company he goes to. So what's interesting about those is they're really starting to look at personal or individual liability as opposed to just organizational liability, because I think a lot of the regulators and the people bringing these lawsuits are realizing that people are not going to be motivated if they think they're going to be insulated by their company, right? But if they know they can be individually liable, that's an entirely different story. So the Ukrainian power grid, this was an attack in 2015. It was the first of its kind. It was around Christmas, really cold in the Ukraine, December 23 of 2015, and a phishing attack was able to obtain one of the operators' login credentials, and then using that escalated their privileges and were able to shut down power to millions of people in the Ukraine at kind of the coldest time of the year. The FACC is an aerospace company, another phishing attack. Again, the sophistication, but also the type of data that's being targeted here, right? It's confidential information that's worth something in the market, worth something competitively. And then last, I'm just going to mention the 2018 World Cup. Fans were attacked by Russian actors where they received emails offering free tickets. So be careful around big events, the Olympics, the World Cup. I'm a huge fan of the Mets, and so now, go Mets. Any other Mets fans here? Excellent. Tonight we ride, because tonight is the third game of the NLDS, and so don't fall for these scams. Also, whenever there's a new release of a device, new release of an iPhone or something like that, that's when you see a lot of the rise in these types of attacks, because they know that you're aware and you're looking for kind of some benefit. By the way, that visual up there is the Sony ransomware screen that popped up for the employees when they tried to log in. Okay, so I hope Verizon is sponsoring this conference because we've mentioned them a lot. They issue an annual data breach report, that's why, and it's very detailed actually, so I highly recommend it. It's free, you can just download it. All you have to do is give up your personal information, just your email, not a big deal. They're not gonna ask for your password. And so I'm just going to highlight a few findings from this report, from the 2024 report, which looks back at the 2023 time period. So they recorded 3,661 data incidents. Out of that, 3,032 had confirmed data disclosures. Of course, the real numbers are much higher than this because not everyone reports these data incidents. And then also all the threat actors in these data incidents were 100% external. That's not always the case. We frequently get clients who have disgruntled employees, disloyal employees, or even inadvertent employees that make inadvertent mistakes that are not malicious. So this report does not reflect that, but that's just because that's not typically the scenario that you would see. And then you'll see that the actor motives are largely financial, that's over 90%, and then some are espionage, which is actually 5%. That's pretty significant considering the number of data breaches that we're talking about. And then in terms of the types of data that's been compromised or targeted, credentials are 50%. And of course, that's because if you have somebody's credentials, it's much easier to propagate your attack if you have a legitimate individual user's credentials to do that. And then 41% were personal, so this is your credit card, Social Security, et cetera, type of information. And then other type of information is 14%. So that's the information, you know, with the F-35 fighter jets and the confidential information, that type of information. These charts are also interesting because it shows you the types of social engineering incidents. Pretexting is one. I actually consider that as part of phishing, but here they separated it. Pretexting means it's another social engineering attack where they fabricate a story and they have a pretext and they have a little story they tell you as to why they need you to do certain things. Phishing, in this report, they're just categorizing as the traditional phishing, which is getting your credentials, and extortion is the ransomware attack type of things. And you'll see that the top vectors on social engineering breaches is email. And there's some phone and some web applications, some SMS, but mostly it's email. Okay, phishing attack timeline. This is very interesting because what the study has shown, what the Verizon report is showing, is that it takes the median time for a person to open or respond to a phishing attack is 21 seconds. That means in 21 seconds, somebody is making a decision to open a link or to go to a website that's in a phishing email. And then it takes another 28 seconds, that's the median, to then enter data. And that tells you that people who are falling for these scams are acting on it within 60 seconds. Within 1 minute, people are acting on it. And that's typically what we see. Typically, these are urgent communications for a reason. And if you're going to fall for it, typically people do fall for it right away, right when they see the communication. The second graph that's on the bottom is showing the report rate. There is an increase, which is great, but the report rate is still under 20%. Not great, right? That means that people who are falling for phishing attacks or receive phishing emails or communications are not reporting them. They're either deleting them or they're clicking on them and falling for them and not reporting it to anyone. So that's not good. And so you should be thinking about not just training your employees on how to spot phishing attempts, but also to report them. They shouldn't be scared to report it to you, because those first moments are very crucial, as those of you who've responded to data incidents know. The red line on top shows you the rate at which people were not clicking on the phishing attacks, and that's the rate of reporting for those types of those individuals. The bottom is when they actually clicked and when they reported, and you can see that their trends are the same, but also there are fewer people who are reporting it even when they're falling for phishing attacks. Not great. Let's learn a little bit more about the evolving landscape. Spear phishing is something else that we've seen over time, and that's a targeted attack. And by that we mean, it's the communication is specifically tailored to a person. So where we saw attacks in the early 2000s just saying unpaid invoice, this time it will look like a communication from a person you do communicate with, or you do know, or that is an employee. Frequently, because for lawyers, our profiles are publicly available and we're on the website, I'll get emails all the time from people purporting to be my managing partner, my CFO, my COO. So spear phishing is another attack that's being used now. In fact, in the 2000, how many of you are familiar with the DNC attack, the Democratic National Convention attack 2016? That was a spear phishing attack. What they did, it was a two-pronged attack, and they used actually publicly available email addresses and personnel information of people who worked on the Clinton campaign from prior years, and they then targeted specific individuals pretending to be those people. And in fact, John Podesta, who was the chair of the DNC at the time, or the DNC campaign chair, was targeted first, and then his information was used to propagate attacks on other employees or other personnel. Vishing is short for voice phishing. It's the use of fraudulent phone calls to trick victims into providing sensitive information. They target a lot of the elderly, actually, which is really, really unfortunate. And so what they do is they call you. We had a client once who called us and said, look, I just came from my bank. I just transferred $200,000 because I received a phone call from the FBI saying that my car, a car in my name, was found in a foreign country, and in order for me to be released from potential criminal prosecution, I needed to transfer them money. And this woman actually went, a very sophisticated person, high-level executive from a multinational corporation, went to the bank, had this conversation right in front of a person from the bank as they're transferring the funds, and was on the phone with somebody with the instructions. So, it can happen in the most unlikely ways, and so we always have to be vigilant. Smishing or SM-ishing or SMS phishing is a practice of sending text messages to someone to trick the person into revealing personal information. Oftentimes, they'll text you and say, hey, how are you doing? Hey, what's going on? Hey, it was good to see you. They pretend that they know you. They pretend that you should expect this communication, and they're relying on people wanting to please and wanting not to offend, because perhaps you didn't record somebody's information that you met at a conference like this one, and you don't want to offend them and think that you're not, you don't care. Farming is another one that we see a lot, especially around the holidays. Farming is when you have bogus websites to steal information. And so when you are shopping online, especially during the holidays and around Thanksgiving when the sales happen, make sure that you are going to the legitimate website of the company. We have clients that we assist with this, actually, where we assist them with having those websites taken down. But the problem with that is by the time you notice it, by the time people figure out it's a scam, it's usually when they haven't received the product. And of course, weeks or months have passed by then. All right, AI phishing, something that we heard about, relies on machine learning and not traditional social engineering. This is an important one. A few months ago, there was actually a rash of kidnapping phishing attacks. And by that I mean, so many of the young people are on TikTok and other social media, and it's publicly available, which means that there are samples of their voice, of their facial expressions, of the way that they speak. that's available to the public. And these bad actors would call the parents and would target the parents. And on the phone would be somebody who sounds like their child. And their child would say, look, I'm kidnapped, please help me. And they would say, I need you to pay X amount in order for me to release the child. And many parents, because they're so nervous, would pay without investigating or even calling the child to see if the child is safe or not. This is really, really dangerous. And this is what we're seeing more of now. It's dangerous because it's so much more realistic. You know, we have the opposite extreme of the prince from a foreign country that wants you to help them recoup their sweepstakes winnings. And now we have this type of attack, right? Where it is so sophisticated, it's even mimicking the voice and the tone and the cadence of a person that you know. And so it's going to be even more convincing, and it's going to likely convince people to act even more quickly and more urgently, and also they're not going to necessarily see that this is not a legitimate communication. Worm GPT is one that is very popular. It scours the internet for vast amounts of data, and it personalizes the phishing attack by using your hobbies, specific events in your life, a wedding, a promotion, especially if you're posting on LinkedIn and the like, and other things in your life, including your recent purchases. And then it would mimic the writing style. And also, AI is allowing these bad actors to scale their attacks so much more efficiently. Instead of maybe sending out 100 emails, they're able to send 100,000 emails in the same amount of time. A group of IBM engineers recently raced AI to create a phishing campaign. How many of you heard about this? Okay. So this just happened recently this year, and they came up with a 5 of 5 rule. And basically, the 5 of 5 rule says it takes 5 prompts and just 5 minutes to create a phishing campaign nearly as successful as one created by IBM engineers. And the typical questions and prompts that they would put into the AI tool is come up with a list of concerns for a specific group. You identify the specific group. In a specific industry, you identify the specific industry. And then you ask them to write an email leveraging social engineering techniques, or ask them to apply common marketing techniques to the email, and then ask them who to send the email to and who to say the email is from. Those are the prompts that they use in order to create the very successful phishing campaign. All right, so with the little time I have left, I just want to highlight, now that I've scared you, I don't want you to lose all hope and walk out of here saying, I don't ever want to hear that lady speak again, because she just makes me feel bad about the world and makes me feel unsafe, and I'm going to just lock away all of my devices. So there are ways, right, to protect yourself individually as well as your organization. Training and education we talked about, not just identifying potential attacks, but also training people to report it, to not be afraid, to help you, right, the company stem these attacks. Employing physical, administrative, and technical protections. MFA is an easy one that still to this day, not everyone employs. And then allocating risk. And by that, I mean using third parties to help you mitigate the risk or control the risk. Have strong contractual protections that protect you or indemnify you if there's a loss resulting from a particular issue. Or have an insurance that covers the risk. And this is important because people think, I have cyber insurance, I'm fine. But what we're finding in our work is that the issue is not so much how much money is left in the coverage or whether somebody has coverage. The issue becomes whether the type of risk that you are likely to suffer from is actually covered by the insurance policy. A few years ago, there was something called bricking that was very prevalent. And that's basically an attack where the malware locks down devices and turns them into a brick. You can't use them. You have to have them replaced. Many insurance policies do not cover that. And many companies that were subject to that type of attack didn't realize that their insurance policies did not cover that. So identify your risks and make sure that you are right-sizing your insurance coverage for it. Keep up with trends. The fact that you're at this conference, already a big win. Thank you so much, Tush. Review your compliance program regularly because the landscape changes, and then you have to have leadership buy-in. So for those of you in the C-suite, make sure that you're paying attention, make sure that you're giving your personnel the tools that they need in order to protect your company. Have backups, always important. And then for personal, lock down your credit reports. If you have kids, lock down your kids' credit reports. They're not opening credit cards, they're not buying a house, they don't need it, right? You don't want their credit to be ruined even before they get started. Never enter your personal information, of course, or provide it to anybody, even if you're expecting them to reach out to you. And then check your financial records regularly. And then check your social media connections, those on LinkedIn, on Facebook, etc. Be discerning about who you add, and be discerning about whether this is the real person they purport to be. All right, with that, thank you very much.